Hi, this is Rachel Nelson. Thank you so much for joining us today. I apologize for the delay in getting started. I had a couple of technical difficulties. But today we're going to talk about your resume and how you can best use it to basically as part of your application to get you into the business school of your choice. So I'm going to spend some time talking through some information that I think is really crucial for you to know. And then we're going to leave time at the end for you to answer questions, which you can do through I believe it's through the comment box. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let me share my screen and let's go. All right, so.
Rachel, your screen is not shared yet. One
Okay,
second.
is it on now?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So what story should your resume tell? We are going to cover Gatehouse. So at Gatehouse Admissions, the firm that I work for, and who we are. We're going to talk about the purpose of a resume. So obviously a business school resume being different from a job resume. We're going to talk about why schools care. We're going to cover some basics on formatting and on content, some do's and don'ts. Then we'll show you a couple of real life edits so you can see some befores and afters, and then we will open it up for questions. So who we are. As you all know, that's why you're on this call, is that the bar for admissions has moved higher and higher over the past few years. I work for Gatehouse Admissions, as I mentioned, and you can see here that there are 5 of us who went to a range of US business schools, and we work with a wide variety of clients now. You can see our founder, Liza, on the left-hand side, and then also Brooke, who's next to me, and she's got experience as an admissions committee member for Harvard Business School. So together we've been doing this for a lot of years and can bring a lot of experience and expertise to bear working with applicants. So very quickly about myself, I went to Harvard College for undergraduate and then to Wharton, where I graduated in 2004. I then spent a number of years working in financial services at American Express, GE Capital, and Bank of America in product management before I moved into admissions consulting about 7 years ago. So hopefully we will cover the majority of the questions that you have today during this call. But if not, I would absolutely encourage you to visit our website, Gatehouse Admissions, and there you can sign up for a free 30-minute consult. There's no strings attached, and you may find it helpful to get some personalized advice. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so this is the first slide, the first content slide in this deck. And the reason it's here is because all the points in this page are really crucial. So as I already said, a resume for business school is not the same as a resume for a job application. And this means that your resume will need to be significantly altered. And if you're listening to me and you think this doesn't apply to your resume, I hope that by the end of this presentation, you'll feel differently. So your resume serves as a roadmap that the admissions committee can use, and it helps the reader to see your personal and your career path very neatly laid out. It also provides highlights. It's not meant to be a laundry list, and hopefully it showcases the impact you've had. So this one I think is really, really crucial and something that everybody has trouble with. So you're not going to be able to share everything that you want, and you're not going to be able to share everything that you can share. And that's true of your resume, and it's also going to be true in your essays and in the recommendations and in every facet of your application. So the key is for you to figure out what you want to share and what you don't. So for the resume, it's really identifying which are the bullets that you want to keep and which are the ones that you don't. And lastly, I would call this our Gatehouse pro tip. So really, you want to use your resume to reinforce in every single bullet that you're outstanding and how unique you are. So what you want to do is look for opportunities where you can show what you've done that someone else in your position or in your role might not have done. So really, it's all about what is it that sets you apart and what is it that makes you you. So it says here, real estate in the page is precious, and it's really, really true. You want to think about each line, each bullet being the best possible way that you could use that space. So why do school cares? Why do schools care? So business schools are looking to see that you're a leader. They want to know that you can handle the rigor of business school, meaning that you can actually do the work. And they want to know that you're going to be able to make impact in the future, that you're going to make use of your business school degree. They're looking for your analytical skills, so how you approach and resolve problems, your ability to work in teams, so how able you are to work with others, your leadership abilities. So it's not just about what you've done, but how you get it done, and how you work with others. And the last one, and this is really important for a resume, is your ability to make an impact and to drive results. And so this is really about not just ticking the box, not just showing, what the job is that you've done, what the job description might have been, but it's really about showing how you are a top exceeds performer. How do you set yourself apart from the rest? So let's talk a little bit about resume in the formatting. So first thing is you want to make sure that your resume is easy to read. So that means quickly scannable and lots of white space. You also want to make sure that you keep good margins and that you use a legible font. Third one is, most importantly, you want to make sure that your resume is no longer than one page. And if I could list this one out 10 times, I would. I actually had it on here twice and then just took it off. This is something that almost everybody I work with has trouble with. Your resume should be one page. You can see here, if you've got 10 years of experience, that's kind of the cutoff. If you've done an enormous amount of research or you've produced an enormous amount of kind of complicated papers or journal writing that you need to document, maybe that belongs. But otherwise, for absolutely everybody, your resume should fit to one page. And I know you're sitting there thinking, well, she's not talking about me. I am talking about you. And I would say you really do yourself a disservice if you add lots of content, because it can make you look sort of arrogant and maybe not as self-aware. And it also makes the reader's job harder. And I'll make this point in several other places, but you never, ever, ever want to make the reader's job harder, because it just makes them give up. So really and truly, you want your resume to fit to one page. And in here, I use the word curate, right? You want to pick the bullets and the points that you want to make about yourself in your resume. And this means, like I said, you're going to, end up leaving a lot to the side. But the person who's reading your resume knows that. They know that it's not a laundry list. They know it's not everything you've ever done. They know that you have very carefully and concisely selected the key points that you want them to know. And the last thing is, you really want to try to follow a standard resume format. We'll talk about it later, but I kind of alluded to this. One of the key ways that a business school resume is different is the importance of all the sections besides the professional one. So obviously, for applying for a job, they're most interested in what you've done before and how your previous work experience relates to the job that you're applying for. But with business school, that is not the case. So you can see most business school resumes include professional, they include the education section, they include other, which often is called something else, and they may also include a separate section on leadership and community if there's content that can fit in there. So the key thing I want you to take away from this is that the rest of your resume, education, other, leadership, are as important on a business school resume as your professional content is. So you want to highlight what you did in college, how you've participated in the community, and what you like to do in your free time, right? You really want to give the reader a sense of who you are. Okay, so let's talk briefly about the bullets. So high level, you just want to start with a strong action verb. You really want it to be something that makes a point. Here you can see spearheaded, led, drove. You don't so much want ones that are maintained or aided. You want to use the past tense. You want to then talk about what you did and what the result was. So for the most part, your bullets will be something in the form of did X to achieve Y, right? So I did this and then this was the result. So back to this idea of impact, we really, really want to know what the results were. And that's as important as just kind of what was done. Obviously, for most people, they're going to have a wide range of experiences to pull from. You really want to focus on what you've done more recently and less than what you've done a long time ago. Where possible, you want to avoid being vague. So led a work stream for numerous clients. That could mean lots of different things depending on what your job was, what your role was. And so the person reading your resume really has no clue what that means. And the more that you can help the reader to see what you did, the better. And so, I would say it's really about what you did. We'll talk about this in a minute, but not about what a team did or your company did, but really what did you personally achieve. Last one is, and I've kind of mentioned this before, but you want to share what you've done and what you've accomplished. What are the things that set you apart? What is the impact you've had? Often in a job, there might be a number of things that are part of your job description that anyone in your job would have done. But what are the things that you did where you took the initiative or where you produced a result that was superior to what somebody else in your job would have done? That's what you want to include, right? Show the impact, show what you did that sets you apart. And again, really try to avoid anything that looks like a job description. Okay, so talking a little bit about resume do's and don'ts. Let's start with common pitfalls. So these are mistakes that people often make that we want to avoid as much as possible. So first one is too much content. We've already covered this one, but really you want to make sure that your resume is only highlights. Second common pitfall is to be as specific as possible about what you did and to use numbers as much as possible so that you can capture both the situation and the impact. Third one is that your information somehow doesn't tie or match up. And this one, I would really caution people. So the admissions committee, their job is to spot inconsistencies. That is what they're on the lookout for. They're looking for things that don't make sense. So you want to be straightforward. You want to be honest. Don't hide something or think that you're somehow going to slip it past them because they're not smart enough to figure it out. You really want to make it as easy as possible for them to understand your career progress, kind of the progression from one role to the next. You don't want to force them into the position of being Sherlock Holmes to figure out the timeline of when you stopped doing something else, when you started another thing. Was your internship part of your time in college? Was it after? Because they won't bother to do that, right? They have a lot of applications that they're reading through. They have a limited amount of time to spend in your application. And if they're spending their time trying to match up dates or confirm that other information in your application is correct, that's valuable time that they're not spending reading your essays or thinking about your candidacy. So you really want to make sure your application is easy to read. And this is a really key one, that the dates and information tie. So if you reference a specific date in your resume, you want to make sure that that is also referenced the exact same way in your application. So what should you be doing to gain yourself a spot at the university or the business school of your choice? First thing is show different sides of yourself. So that means, for example, if you use one bullet to show your analytical skills, then use another to show how good you are at managing relationships. Second thing is you want to make sure that what you did and what you achieved, you want to make sure that you share what you did and what you achieved. So this is what I already mentioned, but a lot of people in their resume talk about the accomplishments of a team they were on, or they talk about the accomplishments of a company that they were part of. And those are great, but they don't give the reader any sense of what the applicant actually did. So we don't know what they did. We don't know the impact they had, and we certainly don't know the results that they drove. So you really want to make sure that it's about you and that it's specific so that the reader understands your impact. And the last one here is use simple and straightforward language. Basically, you want to use language that the reader understands. You don't want to make them work harder than they need to figure out what you're saying. And the most important thing is you don't want to make them feel dumb. So if they don't understand what you're talking about, it can put somebody off. And chances are there's nobody who's going to be as familiar with your work as you are. Okay, so we're going to talk through some sample bullets. I'm going to show you some before and after slides, and you can get a sense of how your average bullet can be improved. So I'm going to start with professional experience. So let's take a minute. I'll let you read through this, see what you see, and then I'm going to tell you what I see. So I see no numbers, no clear result, and it sounds a lot like a job description. So back to this idea, this looks a lot like a bullet that a lot of people sitting in this job could have written. So what would we like to see? We'd like to see something a little more like this. And here, I start to understand exactly what the applicant did and what the results were. So this, we start to discover, is a marketing effectiveness study. And we know why they're doing it, right? So we have numbers, and we can see the impact that the applicant had, right? So he or she drove a 6% increase in ROI. So this is really clear in terms of what this applicant, his or herself, did, rather than talking about what the group overall did. So second professional example. So take a look and see what you see. For starters, this is a pretty short bullet, but we don't have much sense of what the applicant did, right? So it's pretty vague. There aren't any numbers. All right, and then moving on to what might look like a better version of this one. So here, we start to see the impact, right? We understand what the applicant did. We understand the why. We know that it's client tailored, right? So each of these models is done specifically for a client. It's bespoke. It's SPSS, right? So we know kind of what type of model is being created, and back to this idea of sharing your skills. This is something, you know, this type of multivariate regression model is very likely something that a lot of people can't do. Even somebody in your specific role might not be able to do something like that. This one doesn't have numbers. And I said to you, we always like to try to use numbers as much as possible, but I wanted to include this one because sometimes there just aren't any numbers. And this after bullet, even without numbers, I think does a pretty good job of giving us a sense of what the applicant's abilities are. So we're going to move on to education. So this is a pretty common education bullet. It's got pretty basic information, shows where the applicant went to university and a little bit about what they did. All right, so have a quick look. And here is what it looks like when it's been improved. So now we're starting to learn a lot more about this application, right? We know that this applicant was in a band. We know that he or she studied abroad. We have some information on the internships. Again, we've got dates on these, right? So we know when he or she worked for these firms. And we have some information on just work experience more generally. So I would say all of these things are relevant for business school application, for business school resume. And the main takeaway from this section that I want you to have is that it is as important as the professional section of your resume. And it's really an opportunity to share much more about yourself. So particularly here, for somebody who might be interviewing this person, there's a lot of things to pick from that might be interesting, right? So maybe they want to ask about lacrosse. Maybe they're curious about, you know, being in the band, about the summer internships, about the study abroad. So some of it is giving the reader or your interviewer or whomever it might be that's coming across your resume, just some things that let them know a little bit more about you. All right, so we're going to do another education bullet. I'm not going to give you too much time on this one because there's not much to know here, right? So on this one, we don't really know what these things are, right? What kind of sorority or fraternity is this? Community service is very, very vague. We don't have any idea of what type of community service, or more importantly, the level of involvement. So in terms of the education and the other and the leadership sections, a lot of what business schools are looking for is to understand how much time you spent on something, right? How much did you invest in it? And you'll actually see that it depends on the school, but for a lot of schools, they'll actually ask you to rank order your extracurricular activities in order of how much time you spent on them. And some of them ask you how many hours you spent per week or per month. So they're really looking to know, is this just something that you did once or once a year? Or is this something where you've done it every week for the past 5 years, and this is the impact that you've had? So here's the after, right? So as it turns out, this actually happens to be a client. And in this one, we realized that she's actually really heavily involved in community service, right? She's shown great leadership outside of the office. And we have a sense of the amount of time that she's committed, right? So coordinated 15 recurring community service projects. 15 is a lot. So again, this is a great use of numbers, even though it's not on the professional side. And we see that they're recurring. So 2,500 hours of service in one semester is pretty good. It's pretty substantial. So this one, in the revised bullet, we get a real sense of the impact that she's had in her community. So I'll kind of recap on this one, but I think people tend to be very focused on professional, and I absolutely want you to spend a lot of time working through your professional bullets. They are incredibly important, but as you think about your single page of a resume, the reality is only a fraction of the real estate. So, only a small, maybe it's half, right? But it's not going to be probably a whole lot more for most people is going to be devoted to your professional work experience. And so you want to make sure that the rest of the content on that page isn't throwaway. It's really you, again, curating and making sure that you're putting on there the key stuff that you want to share. So, my suggestion is to think back on your experiences and really kind of take in kind of a fresh look or an open mind, and look back through your life, really. So maybe you took on extra responsibility training new employees, or maybe you managed a mentor program for work, right? So sometimes it can be at work, but not directly in the role that you're doing. Maybe you play basketball on your company's team, or you organize the annual charity run. So then I would say that's kind of within the office. And I would look outside of the office and I would kind of think more broadly, where are there things that you've taken the initiative, right? Where have you shown yourself to be a leader? So do you run a recreational netball group for other professionals, maybe like an evening recreational group? Do you volunteer to sing at a local nursing home? Do you tutor neighborhood kids or foster local homeless cats? You kind of get the gist, that what you really want is to bring out as much as possible this information about yourself that lets the admissions committee know as much as possible about you. So even seeing how you choose to spend your spare time, we all have limited time. And so, knowing that you spent a certain number of hours per week or per month with a specific charity, we get some sense of your values, right? So of what's important to you. And so all these things are really crucial for helping to provide insight into who you are. So the last thing I would say on education is just, I've focused on kind of education, and I've started to talk into this other, but the other section we haven't covered is other, and it's a really crucial spot. Often people kind of like cram it to the bottom of their resume, and it's maybe like one line and says, I like to travel and do yoga and run. This is, again, an opportunity to share languages you speak, the unique skills you have. And by the way, no part of Microsoft Office is a unique skill. Do not put Word, do not put PowerPoint, do not put Excel. Everybody can do these, right? We can safely assume that everybody on this call can use Microsoft Office. So what we want to know are unique skills that you have, unique abilities, hobbies you may have, awards you may have won, blogs you write for, websites you launched, other businesses you launched, research you've done. I'm making this up. Maybe you're a sommelier, maybe you're a CPA, maybe you're a CFA, maybe you're a candle maker, a triathlete, a state champion, long jumper. All of these things are useful because they paint a picture of who you are. So I don't want you to just throw everything on here But back to this idea of curating, to the extent that there are specific things that you can pick out and share about yourself to give the admissions committee an insight into you, the better off you are. So I've spent a little bit more time today focusing on kind of the education and other bullets, and that's because I just want you to realize that very likely they're going to be probably 40% of your resume if you kind of take them all together. And so you really want to treat them as though they are the equals of the professional sections. So very quickly, I'm going to open it up for Q&A. But while we let those come in, I just wanted to thank you very much for your time today. And I wanted to share a final thought, which is, probably the folks on this phone are in a variety of different places. My guess is there are some people who are scrambling to get round 2 applications in and are looking for final tips. And then there's others who are just starting to think about applying next year, or maybe it's even the year after or the year after that. But my suggestion is that you think about contacting us for a free consult if you have questions that weren't covered, because obviously I know people always have profile specific questions, and that's great. This isn't the forum for that. And so you probably won't get your questions answered, but we are happy to do free consults. As I said, there's no strings attached. And so if you have questions that weren't covered, I would encourage you to reach out. And so with that, I am going to turn it back to our discussion. All right, so how do you suggest we put in our experience for volunteer projects is the question. So this depends a little bit on when your volunteer project happened. So again, back to this idea of not forcing your reader to be Sherlock Holmes, the easiest thing is for you to fit it into the time frame in which it fits. So for example, if you volunteered as part of work, you're going to slot it in under work. It may be kind of a sub-bullet. So let's say you ran the mentorship program at JP Morgan in your division. That might be a bullet within your work experience. If you volunteer, let's say you have a couple of volunteer projects that you do on the side that are not related to work, but they're not from college or from university, I would suggest putting those ones in a leadership or community service section. So again, you don't want to break that section out and have kind of one thing, but for most people or many people, they can kind of identify a few things that they can pull together. And so I would say if you have a couple of volunteer experiences, a great spot for them can be that leadership and community service section. And obviously last one would be if it was relating to university, again, make it easier for your reader to figure out when you did it. So if you volunteered during college, put the bullets under college, along with however else it is that you spent your time. So some of what you're trying to give the admissions committee is a sense of how you spent your time. So by grouping things kind of thematically or by time frame, they get a sense that you did these volunteer activities, for example, while you were working full time or while you were in school full time, or at some other point. So I hope that answered that question. Yeah, so I'm not sure if everybody can read the question on the screen, so I'm going to read it out to you. A CFA degree comes in the education section or the certification section. This is, the answer is it could be either. So it depends a little bit if you have multiple certifications. So here's what I would say about your resume is I've outlined high level the sections that most people have. Within that, you should modify the resume to fit. So some people will have certifications, maybe it's a bullet point with some certifications listed. Some people might have a separate section. It depends. Other people might just have it within education as a separate section. There's no wrong or right way to do it. What you don't really want to do is get into the habit of either creating a section or creating a bullet that just lists one thing. So if that's your only certification, I wouldn't put a bullet under other that has certifications, because actually it would be certification CFA. There's no right or wrong. It really depends on kind of what the other content is that you're trying to share. Yes. Okay. So the question is, if you've worked in a couple of companies for very shorter stints and assumed that the roles were not aligned with the rest of your experience as well as post-MBA goals, do you still need to show them on your resume? So the one of the things, or one of the number one things that the admissions committee is going to be looking for is back to this idea of a roadmap or telling a story. They're going to be looking for holes. And when you leave out jobs, they're going to wonder what you did. So this is a bit of a nuanced answer. So let's say you worked for 6 or 7 years and you maybe your first role was as a paralegal. So you worked as a paralegal for 6 months, you realized you didn't want to do it, you went on to go do something else. So in that case, maybe you just want to, put the company name and the role and the dates and not put a whole lot about what you actually did, because it doesn't sound that, kind of what you did was that relevant. But in general, if you have gaps on your resume, it's going to force the admissions committee or the person reading your resume to spend a lot of time figuring out why the dates don't match up. So this would be a perfect example where I would say two things. One is you absolutely want to do the work for them of kind of making sure the dates are very clear so they can see this transition. And the second thing is, so you really want to potentially use the optional essay. So you may want to explain in your essay kind of why it is that you moved from one role to the other, what the transitions were, kind of your rationale, what you've learned from it. It's pretty common for people to not necessarily know what they want to do out of college and maybe to take a job that's available because it pays the bills. Business schools understand that. What I would say is the most important thing is, to the extent that you learned something from those roles, even if they're not aligned with the rest of your experience. Let's say you worked and you managed a Taco Bell. That's great leadership experience, right? That may not be tied to the job that you did after or the job that you want to do. But there are a number of things, or maybe that was your summer job. You worked as I actually know somebody who worked their way through college working at McDonald's. And actually the amount of experience they had was great for business school, right? Because they had real life experience working with customers. So what I would say is, don't undersell your work experience, and to the extent that you can, be honest about it. So what I would say is, when you say shorter stints, it's a little bit hard to tell. Do you mean like 2 weeks and then you quit? Or do you mean you had a couple of like 6-month or 1-year jobs? But definitely I would say if it's anything that's like a sizable amount of time where you actually like worked there, you probably want to include it. Extracurriculars and education. So I would say extracurriculars and education. Again, this depends on your resume and what your extracurriculars were. So I'm making this up, but let's say you played a sport. Let's say you played for the national team of Sri Lanka, right? And you did that through high school and then university, and then you did it on the side while you were working. Something like that carried all the way through might be treated differently, or probably would be treated differently than extracurriculars that you did in university and then after, right? So to the extent that you matched kind of the second thing I described, I would say the extracurriculars that you did while you were in university belong in that section, right? So to the extent that they're specific to being in university or to where you did your degree. So let's say you volunteered at a homeless shelter in the town where you went to university, that neatly fits into your education section. On the other hand, if if your kind of leadership and community service section is about a number of different volunteer experiences you had around, a certain type of thing, like homeless is the example I just used, it may be that actually the extracurriculars that happened during university belong in that section. So it really depends, but I would say the key thing is you want to highlight the extracurriculars. So you want to make sure that whatever it is that you've been doing outside of work since you graduated from university, and then whatever you did in university outside of studying, that to the extent that those are things that you spent time doing, that you were invested in, you want to make sure that you include them. So I would say don't get so caught up in the where things belong. You can always move things around, but the most important thing is to make sure that the key points that you want the admissions committee to know can appear on the page. So again, there's no one right way to do it. And actually, often with clients that we'll have a couple, we'll sometimes or often kind of share resumes across from one to another. And, the key thing is that the information is there, but, often I might look at a resume that somebody else has done and it will be different than how I would have laid the information out. It's perfectly correct. It's stellar. Usually the person's going to get in, or often the person might get in. So don't get too focused on the where. It's really, the key thing is the what. Yeah, so what common mistakes do you see applicants make in the resumes? I mean, the big ones are resumes that are longer than one page, dates that don't match, dates that have holes. So for example, did one job from 2018 to 2020, did another job from 2016 to 17, so I'm missing between 17 and 18. Again, having it not make sense for the reader. So I would say kind of, I'm not sure that they're silly, but like, you just do not want to force your reader to spend any time figuring out what you've done. And also you want them to like you, right? At the end of the day, and this is not a comment that's specific just to the resume, but to your application. This is, again, why a business school resume is different than one for your job. It's like they're picking somebody who's going to sit in a seat and become part of that community. And they're part of that, when you're an alum of one of these universities, one of these business schools, you're an alum forever, right? There's no getting rid of you. So they're picking both somebody who's going to sit in class and have interesting and insightful things to say and add value as part of the community, kind of while you're there. But they're also picking somebody who's going to be on campus, right? Are you going to like bump into somebody, knock them down and just keep walking? Are you going to be, I was going to use the example of kind of, are you somebody that, the other classmates are going to want to get a beer with? This is really something where at most business schools, there's a big social element, right? And so it's not that you have to be out partying, but you have to be somebody that your classmates would be comfortable to ask a question of, or that, that you would be open to helping somebody with something, or just kind of being a positive member of the community. So I would just say you really want to make sure that you come across as being honest, forthright. This is not about the content, but this is just about, kind of who you are. So I would say super common, people come across as very arrogant, and they think it's going to somehow help them by kind of wowing the admissions committee, and instead it's a huge put off. So I would say really try to put forward your best self and just, show all the great things that you've done. I'm sure you guys are all really outstanding, but show the great things you've done in as kind of humble and self-aware way as you possibly can. A finance side experience in college. I would probably put this in education. Again, it depends a little bit, but if this is an extracurricular activity in college, the easiest way for your admissions committee reader to understand how it fits is to see it in there. Also, again, they know how you spent your time, while you're in university outside of class. And I'm going to guess that this might have tied to your major or concentration, but if not, also interesting just to see that you maybe have a variety of different interests. So the question is, if you worked a full-time job and then went part-time, should you drop the part-time? No, I don't think so. I mean, so I wouldn't worry about lining up in the sense of it's okay to have overlap. Really what you're trying to avoid is a gap. But I would actually think of this one the opposite way from how you framed it, which is, to me, if you go part-time and then you also are doing a full-time job, that's pretty impressive, right? So I would actually, if you, again, you're going to have to make sure that it makes sense to the reader. So you're going to have to be very clear about the dates. And even in the bullet where you say, went part-time or kind of did X and such, I'm assuming that when you went part-time, you're actually doing kind of like meaningful work. But I would say being able to balance kind of the part-time work with the full-time, and also kind of the loyalty. I'm guessing that there was sort of a continuation of some projects that you were working on. Those are all great things to show about yourself. So I wouldn't drop the part-time off. but I would just be super clear as to how the dates worked and to what you were doing simultaneously, so that it's crystal clear to the person reading your resume and they're not getting confused thinking like, I think she's fudging her dates here. You also, depends on the scenario, it may be really easy to make it clear in your resume, but you could also do it in your optional essay just to explain, I did such and such job, and then when I transitioned, there was a period of X where I did this. And again, done the right way, I think it really shows great things about you. All right, so I know we're kind of coming a little bit up in the hour, probably take 2 more questions if that's all right. Okay, so the question is recommender. Yeah, so 2 things. One is you always really want to have your current direct manager write a recommendation if you can. Sometimes you can't. Maybe your job doesn't know that you're applying to business school, or your boss went on leave, or whatever else it might be. So it's not always, but in general, you always want your direct manager to write your recommendation. So that's the first thing. So then your question is sort of, who's going to write your second recommendation? And just to back up really quickly in recommenders, what you want, and I'll give you a quick tip, people always try to pick the most senior or the most famous person that they know, and that is not the key. You want to pick the person who's going to write the best recommendation for you. And that means the person who's going to advocate for you and really wants you to get in, right? They want you to succeed. They're going to spend some time writing your recommendation. That is what you want. Do not get focused on level. So back to your question. This person is my mentor. So it sounds like they probably tick the box in terms of being a really strong advocate. In general, obviously somebody who's closer in, kind of more recent would be better. But what I would ask you about the mentor is what they know about you. And so I would say that the challenge with a mentor relationship is oftentimes you might know a lot about them, but they may know kind of some about you, but they may not be able to actually in a recommendation talk very specifically about what you've done. Now, this depends on the mentor relationship, so I'm not saying you shouldn't ever do it, but it can actually be a hard recommendation for somebody to write. And so I would step back for a second, independent of the question about the time frame, and really just say, to yourself, is this person going to write a strong, or not, are they going to be in a position to write a strong recommendation where they can tell somebody how I am different from other people that they have known kind of in my role or in my age group or in my whatever. And it may be that they can, but I would just say you want to really make sure that they're going to be able to do that for you. And then I would say, is there somebody who can write a recommendation who's more recent that would be as good, obviously, or stronger? So I would say it's okay to use an older one, provided you have that really, really recent one. But again, I would take a look at the ones that you have, because if you did have a strong recommendation that was more recent, my recommendation would be to go with that one. But again, it's all weighing out who's going to write you the strongest recommendation. And I use that word at the beginning, but I would say look for your advocate, look for the person who really wants you to succeed, and kind of be guided that way. All right, I think this is going to be our last question. Where do you put a gap year? Yeah, in the optional essay. Is the admission? Yes. Okay, this is a great question. Is the admissions committee okay with a year of pursuing an unsuccessful venture? This is a great way to end. Failure is great, right? So for business school, failure is nothing to be embarrassed of or embarrassed about. It's really, what you want to show is what you've learned from it, right? What were your experiences of it? So again, back to this idea specifically, what was your role in this unsuccessful venture? And then what did you learn from it, right? So again, oftentimes in life, we learn more from failing than we do from succeeding. So you absolutely want to include this. So there's a couple of different ways that you can kind of highlight it. So in terms of a gap year, it depends how you spent your gap year. Some people do volunteering, in which case that might fit under kind of leadership and community service. In your case, if that gap year, it doesn't actually sound like it's necessarily a gap year. It sounds like you actually took a year to do a work project. And I would, in that case, stick it into your work experience and not make it a gap year. Actually just say, spend XYZ, kind of 2018, here's the company I did, started a company, use the same format that we've talked through with bullets, kind of explain what you did and the impact you had. Even if you didn't get the result you wanted, again, the learnings that you got from that are incredible. And then to your point, I would absolutely cover that in the optional essay. So again, there's a lot of different ways you can treat it, but I wouldn't pretend that it didn't exist. And if you took a gap year, you just want to be straightforward about why you did and what you did with that time. So certainly address it in the optional, but also to the extent that what you did can be slotted into your resume, that is the way to go. And so with that, I think we've answered all of our questions. I appreciate your time, and certainly please reach out if there's any other information that we can provide.